or if this is your first one of your first or second classes, and what your skill set is. And then first one up here, I see JC. So give me a minute or two background, so I know. And if there's anything specific that you had challenges with going through this material, let me know, and I'll make sure to try to hone in on that.
Okay, it's Jackie.
Oh,
It was all good. I don't know what to tell you. This is most of us, I think, our last class before writing our DAR exam. Well, at least for myself, anyways. To which I feel not quite ready for. Um, and I'm from Golden, BC, and I've been doing this for about a year and a half-ish, I want to say. So still feel fresh. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I kind of went left field, I think, compared to what I saw the answers for the more complex questions. So I would love a little extra on those, and just kind of an overview of most of the stuff seemed fairly decent with everything but those two questions. So yeah, sorry, not much to say.
no, that's good. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you, Jackie. How about you, Michelle?
Um, I basically started at the same time as Jackie did. So around 2 years, I live on the Alberta Saskatchewan border. So I deal with a lot of rural properties,
Okay.
well as some residential. I agree with Jackie for the actual case study problems that we went over. I usually overthink things, so then I was like, okay, back it off, simplify things, but maybe I simplified too much. So if you want to go over those would be great.
All right, thank you. How about you, Paul?
Hi, Tom. How are you? Thanks for doing this, by the way.
No problem.
I'm going to mirror Jackie and Michelle's comments. I probably overthink things way too much because there's a lot of numbers and they all get jumbled up. But so if you can go through, the case studies, that would be great. I'm from Montreal, and I appraise. I'm only doing residential properties right now. I do some small income, but generally duplexes and single family homes. I cover a large territory. My appraisals are done in French and English, so if you know any French, you could practice it with me if you want. I mean,
Je n'ai pas français.
but excellent, good, yeah. So yeah, I would say most of the work I do is still English, but a lot of it is still French. But everything translates pretty easy back and forth, so it's not a huge thing. But yeah, this is. I was most looking forward to this course too, because the properties that we're doing right now, they're getting really complicated, and comparables are less and less. And this is a skill set that we're definitely going to need as appraisers moving forward. Banks are not going to use us for the easy stuff anymore. So this is a very important course.
Yeah, good point there. Thank you. Well, Lisa, how about you?
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
So I concur with the case study sentiments of my peers here. Yeah, so if those are gone over, I would highly appreciate that for sure. As far as me, background, I'm from London, Ontario. I've been in the appraisal industry through family since 2007. I owned an appraisal firm here in London, sold it after a decade, moved on to work corporately for First Canadian Title for a couple of years. After that, I got into appraising myself. I've only been appraising for approximately a year and a half now. I'm in the same boat as Jackie as far as courses go. This is my final course before the DAR exam. I just have to get in my several months of field experience, which I'm doing. I work for TrueFind, owned by FNF Canada. I'm also affiliated with MPS Appraisal Group in London here. enjoying what I'm doing very much, and look forward to continuing to learn today.
Excellent. Akbar.
Hi, this is Akbar, and I'm from Ontario, and I'm doing appraising for almost a year. And like Jackie and Lisa, I'm very close to the direct exam. And as far as this course is concerned, this is really long. So anyway, I'm little concerned about the case studies, and the rest of the material is fine and okay. So and welcome to you from Chicago, and welcome everybody to come over and join us today.
Thank you. Melissa?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so I've been doing this a while. I'm ready to write my DAR. I just have to have this just like everybody else. And for me, going through this, I had previously taken this course a couple of years ago. So I would like to go through the case studies again, because clearly, just like everybody else, there's some questions. And I'm in Ontario, just north of Toronto in Barrie. And for the most part, I do things that are odd to begin with, because there is no normal or easy appraisals anymore. So I do a lot of waterfronts and different properties that way. But other than that, that's it. I'm pretty much like everyone else, ready to write the DAR and looking to see what I can pull from today.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's everybody who's taken a class on there. Just for the record, I am a DAR. So I went through everything you guys have gone through, but I did it many years ago. And I'm also a certified appraisal reviewer with CNA130 as well. I never went and did my DAC, but I'm not up in Canada appraising any commercial properties. So that's kind of that. All right, so you all can see my the PowerPoint on your screens. Can you, yes, thumbs up? All right, okay. All right, well, the objectives are clearly figuring out what's complex and what you have to consider, and do you have the competency to do the particular assignment, how to apply the appraisal process, what type of methodology and techniques you're going to use for these unique and complex properties, and how you gather all that data, and using different methods and techniques, and how good logic and judgment are required in developing the rationale. I can't emphasize enough. I mean, this is just a straight 6 bullet points here, but take it. Most of you have been doing it for about a year and a half to a year, and one of you does waterfront, more complex stuff. Paul said he does more of the complex stuff. We have a lot of rural, and I heard from 2 of you, that simple appraisals just aren't the norm anymore. And that's why it is so critically important that you're able to distinguish how to develop the rationale for a particular assignment. On my end, US is really in a state of turmoil right now when it comes to residential appraisals. And I don't know if it's like this up in Canada, but in 2023, just to give you an illustration, and this is all tied back into a main point that I'm trying to give you here, is mortgage originations are down 82% nationwide. 82%. So that leaves 18% of the mortgage originations being fought over by all the banks, the lenders, and the credit unions out here. And of them, 30,000 appraisers are vying for those 18% of mortgage origination appraisals. And of them, due to great U.S. government and our government-sponsored enterprises, the GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they have been developing technology, so full appraisals aren't required, and so they have property inspection waivers, and they do a lot of if you have a good credit score and you're not borrowing a lot of money and you have good equity in your house, they're not even having an appraisal. So that ties back to they need the appraisers. So for the appraisers who are just sitting out there waiting for that next refinance appraisal on a typical subdivision home, or as well as sales on there, the assignments keep dwindling down. But at the same time, the appraisers who have professional designations and who have the skill set and take the advanced education to learn how to develop value opinions when it comes to more complex properties is where it's at. And that's the only way you're going to survive, especially in the US, is to have that additional skill set where you can be a competent appraiser and produce a credible appraisal report according to the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. And I tell all the appraisers that I've worked with over the years, I'm also chief appraiser for a large national valuation company in the States here. So we have over 100 staff appraisers. And so every day I have appraisers coming up to me, asking me questions. Hey, I have this house and it has a coach house in the back of it. How should I handle that? Or I'm doing a rural property and it's got 2 parcels or 3 parcels or 5 parcels. And there may be or may not be an easement running through the land. How do I value something like this? Or hey, I just showed up at an address and it's on the main street in this town, this smaller town, and it's an old 100-year-old house, and everything along it's all zoned commercial, but this is a single family house. How do I address the property not conforming with the current zoning? And so throughout your appraisal career, you're going to find it's very rare for you to get a nice simple assignment. It seems like every other one or every third one, every property has a challenge to it. And the key to putting together a professional and a competent and a supported value opinion is how you take a look at and how you define the problem on the property that you're going to appraise. So what constitutes a unique or a complex appraisal assignment? Well, it's defining the problem, who's the client and the intended users, what's the intended use for, what type of value are you solving, when's the effective date, what are the characteristics of the property, and what are the assignment conditions. And they all change. I just finished up one. It was for an estate, and what I'm going to do today is, as we're going through here, so I'm just not reading exactly what's in the PowerPoint or in the textbook. I'm going to try to give you some real life examples here that may ring a bell to you. And in this particular assignment, it was as of a date of death, so it was a retrospective valuation. So in the United States, if an heir dies, they want the property valued as of the date of death, so they can establish taxable gains, inheritance tax, and that type of stuff. So in this particular case, I was engaged by the CPA firm, and then the additional intended user was a law firm who's handling the estate, and then the owner of the wife of the deceased, she wanted additional analysis done, and it was on 10 properties. 6 were vacant commercial lots. 1 was a vacant residential lot. 1 was a custom built house. 1 was a house that was built like a church, that was comprised of 2 parcels of land. One house was on 1.5 acres, and then it had an adjacent 5.5 acres of land that was just wooded, and they wanted a valuation of and basically turned into be a highest and best use analysis or a feasibility study on that property. What was the highest and best use of that custom built church-like house on 1.5 acres in relationship to the total 7 acres? And to get to long story short, the value opinion on the house in the 1.5 acres was $1 million, $1,050,000. But then once we did the analysis on the additional 5.5 acres, and we determined under a hypothetical that tearing down the house and then subdividing the total 7 acres into 25 parcels, buildable lots, on there with an average price of $300,000 a lot. The highest and best use overall wasn't its current use as a house on 1.5 acres. It was to be subdivided on that. And that assignment alone took me about a month to do, but there were a lot of questions and a lot of information that I had to determine when I was defining the problem. So the first one, well, who's my client and who were the other intended users? Well, I just explained what was the intended use. Well, it was for estate purposes. The type of definition of value on here, in this particular case, it was market value, but I didn't make that determination right away. So the first thing that I did was I contacted the CPA and I contacted the lawyer, and I said, what type of value are you looking here? Do you want these properties valued with a definition of market value? And both of the additional intended users said yes, that's how we want you to do the appraisal reports. Now there was some confusion with the wife of who was now in charge of the estate. She didn't really understand that, because when you're getting some of these assignments, not everybody they don't understand appraisal world, and they don't understand what our role is all the time, and they may not know exactly what you have to do and why you have to have certain information and why you're asking the questions. The worst thing that can happen is, you get a client, they ask you to do an appraisal for something, and as you're starting to do the property, you find out that there's other factors involved there. And if they tell you, oh, I want the appraisal done that way, remember, the client does not dictate how the appraisal is supposed to be done. It's the appraiser who's supposed to educate the client and the intended users to make sure that they understand the correct techniques and the correct approach to the valuation, because that's how a lot of appraisers find themselves in trouble or find themselves in USPAP jail, is because they just went through and accepted assignment, completed the way that someone requested it, when all along it wasn't done the right way. And then someone reviews their report and they have a problem with it, and the appraiser says, well, this is what they told me to do. If you recall in your USPAP class course, it's up to the appraiser who decides the proper scope of work and how to develop and report that opinion of value on there. The effective date of value in my case was as of the date of death. It was back in June of 2023. And then you have to identify the characteristics and all the different assignment conditions. So your textbook here and the PowerPoint says, could a future court appearance or testimony potentially be required? And it can be, especially if you have no court experience. And that's always challenged. You know, a lot of appraisers, they're really scared to go to court. A, because they never have done it before. B, they've never taken a litigation class. C, they've never really worked with an attorney before who can help them or developing them in through the whole deposition process, as well as expert testimony, as well as preparing your work, your work file for potential court appearance. Now, you always hear about your work file, right? You have to, everything that you do needs to be contained in your work file. Now, when we put forth our appraisal reports, whether it's a complete or a restricted appraisal report, you know, each one is reported in a different way. Some contain more. Complete appraisal contains a lot more information as opposed to a restricted report. But at the same time, if you know you're going to go to court, you have to keep in back of your mind that your work file needs to be solid. And you have to have all the support in there, because the first thing that's going to happen is when you get on the stand and the opposing counsel has a copy of your report, and they're going to say, Mr. Appraiser, or Mrs. Appraiser there, can you explain to me how you arrived at your condition adjustment on comparable sale 1 and 3? Or how did you determine what the surplus land value was? How did you determine what the functional obsolescence amounts that you had in there? And all that information needs to be in your work file, and you have to be versed and able to support those conclusions, especially when you're in court. Next one, would an intended user other than client have different needs? Sure. You know, the example I just gave you, you know, I have a financial firm and then I have a law firm, and who are trying to establish the valuation of all of those properties as of a specific date. And then you have the law firm who's sitting there, who's in a financial guy who's trying to deal with, you know, all the financial implications regarding those properties and those values. And then I was just saying, what's the client's level of understanding? And I can tell you that I still am getting questions from the wife. She's up there in age a little bit, and you know, I sent in you know, my first 6 reports on the commercial land values, and see, they had appraisals done just 2 years ago, and my values were higher than the ones that were done 2 years ago. But 2 years ago, what were we dealing with? We were dealing with COVID, right? And when COVID came around, it kind of stopped everything. And so the market conditions have changed, and so has real estate conditions on there. So primary determining element for the scope of work is the intended use. So here's an example. Appraiser has been contacted by a bank to appraise a house, single family. They discussed 2 intended users and 2 intended uses for the appraisal. The first was the bank, and the bank is going to be basing it off of with a new loan. And then the client also identified a second intended user as the borrower's attorney. who wants to rely on the appraisal to establish how much his client should pay the co-owner in a buyout. Now, we don't see this too often, but in this particular case, what do you think one of the first things we have to decide is, all right, what do they both want market value on this assignment? I would think so. In all probability, it's market value. But what about the attorney? Could the attorney need something different? And then could the issue of split ownership need to be addressed? And it talks about the discount factor in case study unit 2. But that case study in unit 2, remember that was dealing with that that goofy looking kind of like a berm house on there. And when they did the discount factor on it, it was trying to determine what was the negative impact due to that particular style house compared to traditional homes on there. We always have different definitions of value. So I could tell you here in my career, investment value, you see it all the time, especially when you're dealing with larger multifamily properties. When you're dealing with, like right now, I don't know about in Canada, and industrial buildings are very hot right now throughout the country, and are looking. You have investors, you have a pool of investors who are just looking for those triple net leases on these industrial buildings, so they can put their money in them and get a good rate of return. Insurance value, we do, a lot of appraisers will put in their cost approach that this is not to be used for insurance purposes. But when you get on the commercial end of things or mixed use, a lot of the banks and the lending institutions, they will rely on your cost approach for an insurance value. And there's different ways to get that, and then we have liquidation value. So probably in my time frame, I've probably done maybe a handful, maybe 5, 6 appraisal reports for liquidation value. Most of them have dealt with when we were given it was a portfolio assignment where an investor owns hundreds of properties, maybe in multiple states, and now they need to liquidate those properties through litigation, or the judge has magistrate has requested to have a liquidation value on them. Now, liquidation value, for those who aren't familiar with it, they're usually discounted. Okay, some say be discounted 20-30%. But before you can come up with the liquidation value, what do you need to do? You need to take the proper steps, identify the scope of work, and determine how to develop that discount factor in there. And from that case study 2, they showed going out of the area and finding similar properties, and then they were able to apply that discount factor. And in this particular case, you have to find other properties that that may have went to auction or that were liquidated. And all that information is not relatively easy to find. So that's the power of belonging to an appraisal association, is because you can pick up the phone if you're doing something in Ontario or Toronto, and you don't have the information. That's when you can reach out to a colleague or another member and say, hey, do you guys have any data on this that came from your office? And that's one way you can gather information. Your value and use, what's the use of the property for the way that it's currently being utilized which may or may not be in current conformance with the zoning. So then that brings the whole zoning compliance and whether or not the property can be rebuilt, or whether it can continue to operate if it's vacated. You see a lot of value and use, more or less, in bars, restaurants, and that leads us into the going concern value, because that's similar, and that brings in the trade fixtures, and now you're appraising everything, including in going concern can also tie into goodwill, a goodwill value, which ties into a name brand associated with a particular type of business. Now, years ago, prior to USPAP, we could do those type, an appraiser could do all those valuations, but once USPAP came around, that whole going concern is now usually done by a business valuation appraiser. And if you're doing a factory, or you're doing a farm and there's a lot of machinery and equipment, then you're going to have an M&E appraiser in there providing that additional analysis on there. And then you have the salvage value, which is less than the liquidation value. It's like, once you strip everything out of that property, what's the leftover? What's that salvage value? So the intended use, so we could do a current, that's what most of us do all the time, right? Current. My example was a retrospective based off of a date of death. And then you got a prospective value. What's a future valuation on that property? May be subject to hypothetical condition contrary to what currently exists. You don't know. It all depends on what the client's intended use is. What they're engaging you for will determine what you need to do regarding a prospective valuation. So identifying the relevant characteristics, you obviously have your location and your site. Just give me a second here. I got multiple screens up here. I'm trying to kind of coordinate the PowerPoint with the textbook, so I don't miss anything that you, in case one of you have a question on there. Your public controls, your ingress and your egress. And you'll see that more for your rural properties, where and also you'll see that with your commercial properties on the main streets, whether they're restricting the way you get in and out of it, and then how you access that property. Your taxation. Now, did you want to go over, so I got the PowerPoint up that you're looking at, but then I have the book here next to me, and the book gives these examples in it. Do you want me to go through that example, or do you want me just to continue working off of the PowerPoint and just maybe mentioning the example? What do you find more? Did you have any issues with these examples in the book? You can just go shake your head no, shake your head yes, thumbs up if you want me to go through that example, thumbs down if you want me to just keep going. Just keep going. Okay. I like that one. That's good. So we all know about these will definitely be test questions, is regarding, you got to know what your deed restrictions are, your conditions, and your covenant. Remember, your covenants are binding, usually in a form of a contract document, a deed or a lease, and as opposed to your conditions, which are straight obligations of a particular event that may be associated with that property. Probably the most common one that that I've seen over the years is you go to a newer plan unit development or a newer subdivision, and it's a builder building various models of home in here, and it could be anywhere from a small subdivision to a couple hundred unit subdivision, and a lot what they'll do is to put a deed restriction in on no fences. Because what happens when you have a large subdivision and you don't have deed restriction regarding fences, then one neighbor may put up wood fence, another one's going to put up a white plastic fence, someone else is going to put a chain link fence in there, some's going to go 5 foot tall, some may go 8 foot tall. And we all read about horror stories where not all neighbors get along, and the one neighbor's going to be mad because you didn't put up a fence like they did. And so when you look at it from the outside and you pull up to the subdivision and you see all these different styles of fences, it actually kind of takes away from the general appearance of that location, and it could negatively impact the lack of that deed restriction on the fences could actually negative impact that particular subdivision in comparison to another subdivision down the road that has that deed restriction on there. Our leases, how is that lease impacting, as well as the easements on there. Now, in the states, most properties sites have easements. Usually almost everyone has a public utility easement for drainage and for telephone poles and that, and you usually find them along the backside a lot. They'll usually run a 10-foot easement for public utilities, or you may find it on the side. But what's the appraiser has to be aware of is a good best practice is to request from the homeowner, if you're doing, or the property owner, if they have a plat of survey. I'm assuming you guys all have surveys there on your properties. Yes. And when you look at that survey, that it will identify if there's an easement on there. It'll identify if there's you can see if there's an encroachment, if the fence is encroaches on someone's other property other than your own. So it's real important, but good best practice is to always request a plat of survey. I always take a picture of it with my phone, just so I have it. And that's a good rule of thumb. So if you're ever questioned or underwriter has any questions on that. All right. So we typically do our appraisals in fee simple. And what's fee simple? Nice beginning test question. Fee simple deals with the bundle of rights, right? Remember the old acronym SLUGGER? So in order to have fee simple ownership, you have to have the right to sell, lease, use, give, enter, or refuse any of those. That's your bundle of rights. Like I said, SLUGGER, good way you can remember that. And if you have all of them, now you have a fee simple estate, as opposed to if you had a leasehold interest, and we'll get into that. I'll give you another example of that in a little bit. But you can also appraise a partial holding, a fractional interest, and a physical segment. Now we know that the easiest one there to remember is the physical segment, because we used to get this all the time here. It was when you went to a property and it was on 20 acres, and the lender would come back and say, hey, I just want you to appraise the house on 5 acres and not 20 acres. All right. Well, that creates different challenge for the appraiser to do that assignment on there. And it will involve extraordinary or a hypothetical condition. And that's where you have to make sure you inform your client of such thing. Fractional interest is a percentage that somebody owns on that property. A number of years back, probably 15 years, I was given an assignment. We have Ace Hardware stores up here. You have Ace Hardware stores by you, or but anyway, the main family member passed away, and there were 8 brothers and sisters, and they all owned a fractional interest, a partial interest in that property. And so we had to do a valuation, and we had to actually come up with different sales that were just partial interest sales for the fractional interest. And then we have, the partial holding on that particular property. So the partial refers to this hunting camp scenario on there. It can't be divided into segments, and there's no exclusive rights. That's a partial. Fractional is through shares, or all owners are entitled on here, and refers to the timeshare on there. And then the physical segment on here. Our assignment conditions, our general assumptions, limiting conditions, our EAs, our hypothetical conditions, or jurisdictional exception, and other assignment conditions. I would have to say that, as far as your general assumptions and limiting conditions, pretty much most appraisals are all the same. Some appraisers, you look at them and you look at their reports, and they create additional pages of conditions or in their reports, so they can get quite lengthy. But the biggest challenge for an appraiser is understanding the difference between an extraordinary assumption and a hypothetical condition. All right. I would say, I don't know, a third of the appraisal reports that I come across, either an extraordinary assumptions involved or either a hypothetical conditions involved. And so as a residential appraiser, you have to be well versed in that. So the easiest thing that I can tell you, and I tell my appraisers, is the hypothetical condition, all you have to remember is contrary to what currently exists. All right. That's the easiest way to remember. It doesn't exist now, but you're valuing it as if something was there that's currently not there. Extraordinary assumption is you're just making an assumption that something is or isn't negatively impacting the property one way or another. I mean, we'll see this in many fashions. I mean, a nice simple one is you go into a house and you go take a picture of the bathroom, the shower area, and you see some mold and mildew in the shower. Some appraisers aren't going to say anything about it. Other appraisers are going to make the extraordinary assumption that this is not the type of mold that needs to be remediated and encapsulated and negatively impacts that property on there. Another one could be the property. You're out at the barn, or you got a fence and you've got peeling paint, and depending on what your client appraisal instructions are or what their appraisal guidelines are, some of them require the appraiser to identify any deferred maintenance and or provide a cost to cure on it. But you don't know whether or not this is lead-based paint. So an appraiser may make an extraordinary assumption that the peeling and flaking paint is or is not negatively impacting the property. Now, in the US, we have FHA appraisals and through the government, and they're very sticky on that, and they have a thing for any property home that was built prior to 1978, then that lead-based paint needs to be corrected and repaired. So if I'm going to a property and a house was built in 1995 and I see peeling paint on an outbuilding or a fence or the soffit face or gutters, I'm not going to even come close to that because the house was built in 1995. Odds are it's not lead-based paint on there. And then you have your jurisdictional exception where the government kind of trumps everything on there based on the location and the type of property, and then any other assignment conditions. So in the textbook right now, we're at the first quiz here. Did anybody have any questions about any of the quiz questions on page 12 at the end of chapter 1? All right, if nobody does, well, I can't see. I have to, let me look at it. It only shows me 6 people on the slide, and I have to page up here. Did any of you guys have any questions on the quiz? All right. So the primary drivers of the scope of work are the intended user's use and the property characteristics. Scope of work is going to change based on it may require more time than a typical assignment. Again, refer back to that example that I gave you in the beginning. And then your scope of work is going to determine whether you're taking a look at quantitative analysis, which basically is going to help determine your adjustments and how you're doing it from a quantitative standpoint as opposed to qualitative, which deals more with the quality and the quantity. You see a lot more qualitative analysis when you're doing more analysis, more data crunching, as opposed to restricted or less data crunching on that. Standard form can easily be used for as a reporting format. Now, when was the last time your appraisal form is changed? I remember you were going through some changes a number of years ago. So the form that you're using now, is it been the same one for some time now? Is there any proposed plans? Are they trying to redevelop your form? Here in the States, they're talking about they've been in the process for 2 years, and they've been redeveloping our form, and they're actually creating a one form for all properties. So whether you're doing a condo, you're doing a multifamily, you're doing vacant land, you're doing a single family house or a duplex, one form treats all, as opposed to having all kinds of different forms. So and then of course they're modifying all the fields. So anytime you input that information and you deliver it to the client through the portals, that information gets stripped, and then they are building all these databases on that data. So eventually they can use it. So to see whether or not the appraiser is putting in the correct information, doing comparison with their peers. So now, as far as software programs, you guys, are you mainly ACI users, total users, a la mode users? What kind of software are you using now? Anybody?
We use crawl software, Tom. That's what we use. But the form you're talking about, in the US, you have a standard form that you use for all appraisals?
Right now, there's a different form for all the property types. So if I'm doing a vacant land, I use a vacant land form. If I'm doing a condominium, I use a condominium form. But now what they're doing is they have been creating one form for all properties.
Well, I mean, the forms I deal with RPS, NAS, and they have their own like click forms basically.
Yeah.
You can write comments in there, and then crawl is pretty much like you enter all the information yourself. But a condo form is the same as a single family, detached home form. We just change you have a box that says, condominium strata, you have, fee simple, then you describe the property, but it's all the same form.
Okay.
Certain lenders will require different how should I say, variations of the form. Like they prefer a certain type of form, maybe an older form that works better with their software. They can extract the information easier, but it's all the same. For if you're using crawl, I don't know about the other appraisers on here, but if I'm using a crawl form, it's a standard. It looks all the same pretty much.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking is depending on what software you use, there's like five different softwares up here in this down here in the States, and one of them has a peer database. So imagine if most of you are using the same software, and every time you input a comparable sale in there, that you can, and when you go write up another appraisal and you type that property address in your form, it'll automatically pop up and say, give you a number on the upper right side of where the address is, and it's going to say 3, 7, 25, 40. And what that means, and if you click on that button, it will pull up every instance where that comparable was gridded out by another appraiser. And so, not all appraisers interpolate data from the MLS, multiple listing service, or from their data sources the same way. And not every appraiser always concludes with the same square foot area or the same room count or the same basement and bath count in the same property condition and identifies the same amenities. And so what's good about this in one way is, as an appraiser, for a verification source, I can pull it up and I could see here's 10 appraisers, and 8 out of 10 appraisers said it was 1,250 square feet. It was 7 rooms, 3 bedrooms, and 2 baths, and they all rated it in average condition. Well, if I'm looking at my data source, my MLS, and it's a little hazy, and I'm not exactly sure, I feel pretty comfortable now by inputting in information that 8 out of 10 appraisers also selected on there. No, sure, granted, you can apply additional due diligence and make a phone call to that realtor and try to find out and get some better clarifications. But
I'm not aware. Yeah, I'm not aware of anything like that in my area. I don't know about, I can't speak to anyone else. Basically we just, we clone, for me, I clone forms. So if I've done the property before, I could pull in that data from the comparable into the crawl form. So it just saves me time, but I know the information is mine. So I know it's credible and, I figured it out. But as far as pulling in data from other appraisers, that would be fantastic. But I don't know if there's anything available. Not in my area anyways.
Right. Okay.
But that's a huge time saver. If you can do that, if you've got, 8 other or 10 other appraisers that have put in information, that's a huge time saver. Then you can really, flush out your comparables and then, eliminate some right away. And then you just concentrate on 3 or 4 that that look the best. So
yeah,
that would be ideal in a perfect world.
All right, so back to reporting. The commentary should detail the most, should be comprehensive related to the steps that you took to support. So raise your hand, who hates revision requests from underwriters or from clients? Everybody hates revisions requests, don't they? And so what I've been um, teaching and mentoring all of our appraisers over the years is tell a story. Your report needs to tell a story. And like I said, every property is going to have a challenge. I mean, rarely are you going to find a property that doesn't. All right. For instance, you're driving down the street, you're looking at the mailboxes, and you're trying to get to your property address. And as you're driving down the street, every house is, looks like a nice 1-story ranch. And you're going, and then at the end of the street, maybe a quarter mile down the road, you see this big monster 2-story house there. And as you're driving down the street, you're going, oh no. And then all of a sudden, crap, that's the one you gotta appraise. The only 2-story house in a neighborhood with 1-story ranches. Well, there's a lot of things that come into play. You got principle of conformity, principle of progression and regression, principle of substitution. And you have to think about all that as the appraiser. And so now you're trying to find, 4,000 square foot 2 stories in a neighborhood of 1,500 square foot ranches. And you're looking around, and there isn't any in here. So what's the appraiser's thought process on here? Well, the appraiser's thought process, I need to find 2-story homes that can bracket my square foot area here. And so now you looked, and within a mile and within the last 6 months, and you didn't find any. And then you went to 2 miles, and you went to a year, and you found one a half a mile away. And then you expanded your search further, and you found a sale that closed 16 months ago. And you apply your adjustments, you develop your opinion of value, but when you're explaining your report, now you got to tell your story. And so what I like to do is I will go right under the sales grid where I'm getting ready to talk about my comparable sales and my selection. I'm going to go, this was a challenging assignment because the subject property was the only 4,000 square foot 2-story in a subdivision of 1,500 square foot ranch homes. The appraiser, unfortunately, there were none. So the appraiser had to expand back to 1 mile location and over 6 months in time to sale. And the appraiser was fortunate to find sale 1 and sale 2, which were this. And so that's like the beginning of part of telling the story on your appraisal report, followed by the second part, which would be, let's talk about your adjustments, why this sale required a larger adjustment than normal. And so and then we conclude it in our reconciliation as far as how that value opinion was supported by those sales with those adjustments, and why you are concluding it where you're concluding for that value opinion. Now, I'll tell you what, you do that on your reports. Now, anybody who reads your appraisal report, especially a review appraiser or underwriter, and you're like, the first thing, let's face it, some of them, not as much as in the past where everybody worked off of checklists, appraisal review checklists. I think everybody's got more savvy over the years, and they know it's all appraisals aren't cookie cutters. But anybody who's reading your report and they're going, oh gee, comp 1 is closed 16 months ago. Comp 2 is over a mile. Comp 3 and 4 required gross adjustments or net adjustments over this percentage. And now they're ready. Normally they would sit there and they'd say, oh, I'm sending back a revision request. And I'm going to say, I need another comp that sold within that subdivision within the last year that's similar to the subject. Now that's a reasonable request for a revision if your report didn't have any commentary in there. But if you told the story and you explained that, hey, this is the only house in here, this is why you had to do this, and you did look, but there were none, so you had to go over here, you had to use a data comp, and this is why you had to make a larger adjustment, or why these adjustments exceeded things. Now when that reviewer or underwriters reads your report, now they can sit there and they go, oh, okay, I understand it now. And they don't want to send a revision request anyway. That takes more time for them. They want to move on with that field. They just want to feel comfortable that the way that the data was presented and the data that was used was supported, and they get comfortable with the whole risk factor on it. Especially, when you're dealing with more a bank lending as opposed to a lender, a mortgage origination firm. They kind of look at it two different ways. I've found over the years, and especially when I worked at the banks that I worked at, our chief credit risk officer came to me. He sat on the board of directors for the bank, and said, Tom, I don't ever want to be in a board of directors meeting, and I don't want them to throw this appraisal down and said, we lost this loan and we're buying it back because of your appraisal report. He says, I don't care if all the dots are dotted and all the T's are crossed. What's the risk to the bank? And that's kind of like, that's more of a banking side thing. That's more of their mentality there. If we have to take this property back, what's our risk involved, as opposed to the mortgage origination non-bank who's just trying to push out widgets, and they just want you to come in and get that number so they can move on and everybody can make their commission. So sorry, my little biased commentary there. Sorry about that. Sometimes the uniqueness or complexity, it may have to be put together in a narrative format. Do you guys use narratives? Any of you? Show anybody who's narrative, put your hand up. Okay, one. Let's see. Gotta find that darn cursor. I tell you, when you use multiple screens, it's hard to. Okay, anybody down here? Okay, so just one of you guys. I gotta tell you, it's really a lost art, in my opinion. Narrative formats are really good to use, especially when you're doing a mixed use, or you're doing subdivision analysis, or you're valuing multiple properties or multiple parcels for one client. Now, just like a form report, your narrative report has to have the same stuff in there. You have to identify the problem. You have to have the scope of work in there, the intended use, intended users, definition of market value. You have to disclose your appraisal process. And speaking of the appraisal process, it's I don't know if you guys recall from your entry level course, you have to identify the problem. You got to do preliminary survey. You got to gather your general and your specific data. Then you have to do your three approaches to value, and then you want to do your analysis. Oh, and your highest and best use analysis, and then you want to do your reconciling. So, and then have all the support and the exhibits in the narrative format. And I don't know, I've been saying for a long time that, I think the art of storytelling, has eliminated a lot of the generations of appraisers. So like I said, I've been doing this for, 40 years plus. When I started, they had an old 1-page carbon copy form, which over the years has morphed into all of these forms. But most of the appraisals were done in a narrative format, on a typewriter. And when you have, so figure every 5 to 10 years, you have another generation of appraisers coming in there. And if that next generation wasn't taught how to do a narrative format, well, then when they train someone else 5 or 10 years later, those appraisers aren't going to know about a narrative format. And I call it the trickle down theory. And so you have a lot of new appraisers who don't know how to utilize the narrative format. And if you see on the screen here, it gives the appraiser an opportunity to fully explain unique and complex characteristics of the property and the assignment. And so if we can get any point home, through this course, this is certainly one of them. And so even if you're utilizing a form report, you still should take the time and tell that story from beginning to end and put it in a narrative format that it's easy to read. And don't be cryptic. Or some appraisers will just give a 1-line sentence, give a little more detail and explanation. But one of the things that's happening here in the States, and I don't know how, if this is occurring in up in your neck of the woods, is the whole racial bias, discrimination, that type of stuff, where now lenders and software programs, they wordsmith your reports. So they search for certain words. And so while narrative format is great and it allows you to explain everything involved, you have to be a little bit more aware and subconscious of the wording that you actually use. Now I got something yesterday, and it just drives me bonkers. But I'm just gonna pull it up here. See if I can find this. Here it is. This is from Mortgage Originator, and in this issue, language alerts. While phrases like low or high crime or desirable or undesirable may be easily identified as subjective, we've identified flags for other frequently used words or phrases to avoid. Not this, convenient to. They don't want you to say convenient to, because supposedly that's subjective. Because who it might be convenient to you, but not to someone else. You're supposed to say within how many blocks. Don't say master bedroom or master bath. Primary bedroom, primary bath. You can't use the word gentrified anymore. So, the neighborhoods you go into where it's an older urban area or older rural area, and they are re-gentrifying, where they're either tearing down older structures and building new, or they're doing complete rehab and renovation and property, and the neighborhood's coming back. That was a phrase. It's even in Webster's dictionary, but no, you can't use that because it's associated with profiling and discrimination. You're supposed to say renovated homes nearby. You can't say within walking distance. It's something has to be identified as located within X blocks or miles from on there. And so this just happened to be something I got yesterday, but there's a lot more wording out there. And I found myself challenged with this, because for years I would typical neighborhood description for me would be subject property is located in a well-mixed residential area, mainly comprised of ranches, split levels, bi-levels, offering various housing options, as, as well as affordable housing and step-up housing. Well, can't say any of that anymore. I can't say affordable. I can't say step-up housing. I have to be more specific. So that's been a little challenging for me, but I've been getting through it. So I don't know. Anybody have you guys been feeling any of that? Any discrimination, bias, wording choices, anything? Okay, show of have everybody's going, no. Well, that's good. I'm glad that's the case. When you see it starting to happen, just it's a bummer. All right, reporting, cautious about restricted use appraisal report when communicating unique or complex property. Yeah, it's harder when you do if you're using a restricted form as opposed to an appraisal report form. It can be kind of tricky, but again, that's why the narrative will help you on there. All right, so this was the quiz. So I'm just gonna, well, I'll just, and any questions, you just say stop. All right, that's not bad. We about an hour for chapter 1, so I think we're doing okay on time. Am I going too fast? Too slow? Am I boring? Okay, so you're finding everything, my story's decent, informative? All right, cool. All right. So chapter 2 deals with the site appraisal due to the unusual characteristics, atypical zoning, and highest and best use concern. And I think it gets kind of challenging when anytime you're dealing with highest and best use. Look, the form for years has had a box you checked: highest and best use, yes or no, as improved or as vacant. And not every appraiser applies the due diligence as it relates to zoning requirements, when it was built, if the current improvements are an allowable use. And so anytime you get here with your site, just kind of think you have to put a little bit more into it, a little bit more analysis. You want to make sure that what you're saying is accurate, true, and correct. So here's one of the illustrations here on here regarding this site. Let's consider some ideas. Who are the potential users? What are potential uses? What kind of data? Where does it come from? Which valuation approaches? Farmer, a builder, billboard company, rec department, public utility, the speculator. So in that example, for most vacant land, the sales comparison approach is usually the best indication of value if meaningful data can be found. And if the property is used something that's income producing, then you have the ground rent capitalization method can be used. And you'll see this usually when you're dealing with farming crops. How much does it yield per bushel per acre? And that all depends if that's part of your scope of work for that particular intended use. And it's okay to combine different valuation methods, whether it's just residential, sales comparison approach, or if you're going to do a cost approach or an income approach on that property. All right, let me catch up here. All right, so the rail bed is elevated. A farmer has to go all the way to the highway to get to the opposite field because he can't move across the rail bed. Adding a rail property isn't increasing his total land size or crop production, but it would add substantial utility to the ease of the farming of the land. So the value of the farm will go up 40,000. Level in the land bed is rail bed is 10. So the value of the parcel to the farmer would be 30. A lot of these examples are super straightforward, super simple on there. I don't think anybody has any issue with that, correct? Okay. Physical segment of a larger parcel. So appraising a portion of a described. So we talked about that 5 acres out of the 20 acres earlier, or appraising a property with excess land with sell-off potential. So great test question. You guys, everybody should know, and it takes, sometimes it gets confusing if you don't do it a lot, but excess lands up here, surplus lands here, right? Excess land is anything that is capable of a separate use. So it can be sold off, it can be redeveloped on there. Surplus land is something that can't be sold off. It is not capable of a separate use. But I'll tell you, when I'm reviewing appraisal reports and I see commentary on there, I bet you 50% of the time the property has surplus land and the appraiser's calling it excess land. So just something for you to keep in mind of is always remember excess land is capable of a separate use versus surplus land. So like for years, I would create cheat sheets on here around my desk. And see why? I don't know if you can see. You see that? All right, so right here is a little sticky note. So that little sticky note for me, because every time I'm talking about, I'm doing an FHA appraisal, they have something called minimum property requirements that deals with existing housings. And then they have minimum property standards, MPS, that deals with new construction homes. And so when I'm typing up my house, I have to put a comment if the property meets minimum property requirements or minimum property standards. And I'm sitting there, I'm like,